History was made in the Senate chamber this week, and it's going to change everything about how future presidents get their teams confirmed. In one sweeping vote, 48 Trump nominees were confirmed simultaneously, something that's never happened on this scale before. But here's what makes this truly explosive. Republicans had to break the rules to make it happen. Let's break down exactly what happened and why this is such a big deal. The United States Senate just witnessed one of the most significant procedural changes in recent memory. When President Trump returned to office, he needed to fill approximately 1,300 positions across his administration, from deputy secretaries to ambassadors to undersecretaries. This isn't unusual. Every president faces this massive task. What was unusual was the unprecedented level of Democratic resistance to virtually every single nominee, regardless of their qualifications or the level of bipartisan support they had received in committee hearings. Senate Democrats, led by Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, made the strategic decision to slow walk every nomination, forcing individual votes and extensive debate periods even for traditionally routine appointments. This wasn't just political theater. It was systematically grinding the Senate's business to a halt and preventing Trump from fully staffing his administration. So what exactly is this nuclear option everyone's talking about? It sounds dramatic, and frankly, it is. The nuclear option refers to changing Senate rules with just a simple majority vote, bypassing the traditional requirement for bipartisan cooperation on procedural matters. Historically, the Senate has operated on the principle that major rule changes require broad consensus, not just a partisan majority. But when one party controls the chamber and feels the minority is abusing procedural tools to obstruct basic governance, they can invoke this nuclear option. Republicans weren't the first to use this tactic. Democrats under Harry Reid used it in 2013 to eliminate filibusters from most judicial nominees, and Republicans expanded it to Supreme Court nominations in 2017. Now Republicans have taken it a step further by allowing batch confirmations of executive branch nominees. The vote to change the rules was 51-47, purely along party lines, with even moderate Republicans like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski supporting the change.
Why were Democrats fighting so hard against these nominations? Their argument centers on what they call Trump's historically bad nominees and his pattern of selecting loyalists over qualified professionals. Senate Democrats argued that Trump's personnel choices warranted additional scrutiny precisely because of concerns about competence and political motivations. They pointed to previous controversial appointments and argued that the traditional courtesy extended to presidents for lower-level positions shouldn't apply when the nominees themselves are questionable. Chuck Schumer repeatedly characterized these picks as unqualified, warning that Republicans would regret their procedural power grab. Democrats also argued they were following precedent by using every available tool to provide proper oversight, something they claimed was their constitutional duty. The strategy was to force Republicans to spend valuable floor time on each individual nominee, hoping either to extract concessions or to slow down the administration's agenda. However, this approach backfired spectacularly when Republicans decided they'd had enough of what they saw as unprecedented obstruction. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune had been warning for weeks that the confirmation process was becoming dysfunctional. The numbers were staggering. At the pace Democrats were allowing, hundreds of positions would still be empty by the end of Trump's term in 2029. Thune and other Republican leaders argued that this wasn't normal political opposition, but rather systematic sabotage of basic governmental operations. They pointed out that many of these nominees had received bipartisan support in committee hearings, suggesting that Democratic opposition was more about politics than genuine concerns about qualifications. The breaking point came when it became clear that Democrats weren't willing to grant unanimous consent even for the most routine appointments, positions that traditionally sailed through without controversy. Republicans argued that Democrats had abandoned long-standing Senate traditions of cooperation on administrative matters, forcing them to respond with equally unprecedented measures. The frustration was bipartisan among Republicans, with even senators who typically prefer traditional procedures supporting the rule change. Thursday's confirmation vote was truly historic in its scope and impact. The 51-47 party line vote confirmed 48 nominees simultaneously, representing positions across the entire federal government. Among the most notable confirmations was Kimberly Guilfoyle as ambassador to Greece, the former Fox News personality and one-time romantic partner of Donald Trump Jr., brings extensive media experience and fundraising expertise to her diplomatic role. Callista Gingrich, wife of former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, was confirmed as ambassador to both Switzerland and Liechtenstein, leveraging her previous diplomatic experience and deep understanding of international relations. Former Representative Brandon Williams from New York was confirmed as Undersecretary of Energy for Nuclear Security, a critical position given current global tensions and America's nuclear infrastructure needs. The confirmed positions spanned from the Department of Defense to the Department of Interior, from energy to various ambassadorial posts, representing a complete cross-section of Trump's administration. Each of these individuals had been waiting weeks or months for confirmation, despite having the necessary qualifications and bipartisan committee support.
This language change isn't just about Trump, it fundamentally alters how future presidents will staff their administrations. The new procedures allow unlimited numbers of executive branch nominees to be confirmed in batches, applying to all positions except cabinet secretaries and federal judges. This means future Democratic presidents will also benefit from these streamlined procedures, assuming they control the Senate. The change represents another step in the gradual erosion of minority party power in the Senate, continuing a trend that began over a decade ago. Critics argue this weakens the Senate's role as a deliberative body and reduces oversight of executive appointments. However, supporters contend it restores efficiency to a process that had become weaponized for partisan purposes. The Partnership for Public Service noted that while the confirmation process was indeed broken, this solution might be throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Future senators from both parties will need to grapple with the precedent this sets and whether additional reforms are necessary to balance efficiency with accountability. With this first batch of 48 nominees confirmed, Republicans are preparing to accelerate the pace dramatically. Senate Majority Leader Thune has indicated that additional batch votes are coming soon, potentially clearing hundreds of nominations in the coming weeks. The White House and Senate leadership spent the summer trying to negotiate a compromise that would have traded expedited confirmations for unfreezing certain agency funds, but those talks collapsed when Democrats refused to compromise. Now Republicans have the tools they need to staff the Trump administration quickly and efficiently, potentially clearing the entire backlog before the August recess. This rapid pace will allow Trump to implement his agenda with fully staffed departments and agencies, something that would have been impossible under the old system given Democratic opposition. However, Republicans have built in some safeguards. They've committed to allowing their own members to object to problematic nominees and remove them from batch votes, though they won't extend the same courtesy to Democrats. The question now is whether Democrats will continue their resistance strategy or accept that their obstruction tactics have been neutralized. This confirmation battle reflects deeper tensions about executive power and Senate oversight in modern American government. The Constitution gives the Senate the power to advise and consent on presidential nominations, but it doesn't specify exactly how that process should work. Over time, traditions and informal rules have governed confirmation procedures, with presidents generally receiving deference on lower-level appointments while facing more scrutiny for cabinet positions and judges. What we're seeing now is the breakdown of those informal norms as partisan polarization reaches new heights. Democrats argue they're fulfilling their constitutional duty to provide meaningful oversight, especially given concerns about Trump's personnel choices. Republicans counter that systematic obstruction of routine appointments violates the spirit of the Constitution's advice and consent provision. Both sides can point to historical precedents and constitutional arguments to support their positions. What's clear is that the old system of gentlemen's agreements and informal cooperation has given way to hardball tactics and procedural warfare. This raises important questions about whether our confirmation system is adequate for modern governance challenges.
Let's examine some of the individuals who were confirmed in this historic vote and what their appointments mean for Trump's agenda. Kimberly Guilfoyle's appointment as ambassador to Greece brings together her legal background as a former prosecutor, her media experience from Fox News, and her intimate knowledge of Trump's political operation from her role in his 2020 campaign. Greece is a strategically important NATO ally in a volatile region, and Guilfoyle's appointment signals Trump's prioritization of personal loyalty alongside professional qualifications. Callista Gingrich's dual role as ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein leverages her previous diplomatic experience and her husband's extensive foreign policy background. These are important financial centers where American interests need sophisticated representation. Brandon Williams' confirmation as Undersecretary of Energy for Nuclear Security is particularly significant given current global tensions and the critical importance of America's nuclear infrastructure. His background as a former congressman gives him valuable understanding of both policy and politics. The broader group of 48 nominees represents a mix of political appointees, career professionals, and Trump loyalists, reflecting the president's approach to staffing his administration with people who share his vision while also bringing necessary expertise.
Senate Democrats are now facing the reality that their obstruction strategy has not only failed, but has actually backfired by prompting Republicans to change the rules permanently. Chuck Schumer's warnings about historically bad nominees and predictions that Republicans will regret their decision ring hollow now that the confirmations have proceeded smoothly. Democrats are left with few options beyond criticizing the process and hoping that some of these appointees will prove their predictions correct through poor performance in their roles. The minority party is also grappling with the knowledge that they may benefit from these same role changes when they eventually regain control of both the White House and Senate. This creates a strategic dilemma. Should they continue to criticize procedures they might want to use themselves in the future? Some Democratic strategists are already privately acknowledging that their all-or-nothing approach may have been a miscalculation that gave Republicans justification for dramatic rule changes. Moving forward, Democrats will need to choose their battles more carefully, focusing their opposition on the most problematic nominees rather than blanket resistance to every appointment. The question is whether they can adapt their strategy or will continue down a path that has already proven counterproductive.
This confirmation battle and its resolution have implications that extend far beyond the current political moment. The precedent established here will affect how future presidents staff their administrations and how the Senate exercises its constitutional role in the confirmation process. We're witnessing the continued evolution of American governance structures in response to increased polarization and partisan warfare. The efficiency gains from batch confirmations must be weighed against the potential loss of individual scrutiny for important positions. Critics worry that this change reduces accountability and allows problematic nominees to slip through without proper vetting. Supporters argue it restores the Senate's ability to function as a governing body rather than a venue for political theater. The reality is probably somewhere in between. Some nominees who deserved individual attention may get less scrutiny, while the overall system becomes more functional and responsive to presidential leadership. The key will be whether senators from both parties can develop new norms and informal rules that balance efficiency with accountability. This is yet another example of how America's democratic institutions are adapting to modern political realities, sometimes in ways that weren't anticipated by the founders, but may be necessary for effective governance in a polarized era.
What we've witnessed this week is more than just a procedural vote. It's a fundamental shift in how American government operates. The confirmation of 48 Trump nominees in a single vote represents the new reality of partisan governance in Washington. While Democrats may regret their obstruction strategy that prompted this change, Republicans have demonstrated they're willing to use their power decisively to advance their agenda. The question now is whether this new system will actually improve governance or simply accelerate partisan warfare in new directions. What's certain is that future presidents and senators will operate under these new rules, for better or worse.